As I'm sure you'll probably know, I spend my days now gathering news, commenting on certain stories in the news, other things that take my fancy. And start of last month, something came up on my news feed that I had a brief look at, and it rang some bells. I didn't really sort of pay much attention to it, but there we go. North Wales spy whose decomposed body was found in a bag was killed by Kremlin, claims ex-MP. It's the death of Gareth Williams, which happened in 2010, and this all sort of ties in with the dark money and the dark arts that take place in the Westminster bubble. So that's the government and also the intelligence agencies. I wanted to highlight this very strange occurrence because it's ridiculous in so much of what was concluded from his death. Now, if you're like me, you'll probably remember, if you do remember it at all, that Gareth Williams was somehow linked to the intelligence services in the UK. He liked to dress up in women's clothes and wear their shoes, and his death was accidental after he sealed himself in a North Face bag and then padlocked it, and then due to the carbon dioxide build-up, he would have suffocated. And the police to this day have ruled it that it was an accidental death, probably an accident, whereas the coroner said there is circumstantial evidence that this was not an accident, that somebody else was in the room, and it's murder. People have described this as being the perfect crime because no clues were left. Well, if you're going to hire somebody to kill somebody and you are a government, you have a list of assassins, very good assassins, on your payroll. And the reason why they're good is because they can carry out the assassination and leave no clues. You can look at the murder of Jill Dando for that, and also you can look at Gareth Williams. So a little bit of background on him. He was a maths prodigy. He worked for GCHQ. He was on secondment to our foreign intelligence services, and he died, but a week he was due to get returned back to GCHQ a week after he died, which is significant because he hadn't packed anything. He was going to leave the flat that he was renting in Pimlico and go back to Cheltenham, pick up his job in GCHQ. It wasn't the intelligence services or his colleagues that reported him missing, it was his sister. She reported him missing on August the 16th at 11:30. GCHQ, his colleagues, didn't report him missing until 4:30 that afternoon, which is when the police did a welfare check. I know that's an Americanism, but that's really what it was. It was a welfare check on Gareth. They were let into the flat and he was found in the bath in this bag, this hold-all bag, which was padlocked from the outside, and he was badly decomposed. Also worth noting that the central heating in the flat was turned right up, which was done, they say, to speed up decomposition. So this gentleman, Gareth Williams, if he was going to kill himself, he went through quite a few hoops to ensure that not only would it look suspicious, but very little evidence was left. It doesn't add up, does it? Also, Gareth Williams was very healthy. He loved his job at GCHQ. There was no reason for him to try and commit suicide. And there was no reason for him to engage in what was called some kind of BDSM practice, because he didn't really involve himself in those kind of activities. Yes, he did visit websites, but the coroner ruled that the visits were so few and far between, it didn't indicate an active interest in that kind of sexual practice, not malpractice. He wasn't a pen pusher. He was what we would call an active agent, and at the time he was reportedly monitoring the SWIFT system for money coming in and out of London, particularly the dark money that we know goes on in the UK. It's long been said that there was a lot of Russian dark money coming into this country. It was being laundered, and it was obviously being reinvested into the country, into people, and then out of the country back to the people who were trying to launder it. He was also a code breaker. Very little is reported on this. As I said, he was a maths prodigy, a highly skilled mathematician, and as such he was used for code breaking, which is probably why MI6 were particularly interested in seconding his services for the 6 months. He was also said to have identified a Russian mole at the heart of GCHQ. Now, it ties into a story that's just recently broke within the last few days, that Liz Truss's phone, while she was working under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, was hacked by Russians. Well, we use the term hacked these days to cover a multitude of sins, and to hack someone's phone in the sense that the press are indicating would mean that the agents would have to have the phone physically in their hands to be able to connect it to a device that was able to rip the information off. What is more likely is that they gained access to the cloud system, assuming that Liz Truss had a government issued iPhone. iPhones are everywhere. Although it's funny, I saw a picture of her in the back of her car talking on a mobile, and it doesn't look like an iPhone to me. It looks like a Samsung device. But anyway, so just a bit of clarity on that. Obviously somebody at GCHQ could do that. They could access her cloud without probably leaving a trace. Or if they were just very sloppy, they would leave a trace. Now, the fact that the press have picked up on this is again very interesting. Also, another key point in all this is that prior to Gareth's death, there were 14 other suspicious deaths in the UK that have been attributed to Russian assassinations. Obviously, the very famous one is Alexander Litvinenko, and obviously the Skripals, both poisoned. Well, the Skripals, they tried to poison them, but luckily enough they both survived. And also the laughable assassins. They didn't... It's just, yeah. There's been a history of things like this in the UK. It seems to me if you're going to off somebody in the anywhere in the world, then generally to do it in the UK. Or Paris is another one. Don't at me. So, Gareth. Metropolitan Police investigation said they had unprecedented access to intelligence officers, people who worked alongside Gareth, and eventually they because there was no new leads, no definitive answers, and the most probable scenario was that he died alone in his flat as a result of an accident of locking himself in a bag. Met Police just washing their hands. They just didn't want to get into it. And if you've got Russian hitmen running around the country, they probably didn't want to do it anyway, because it would open up a whole can of worms. So really, what did happen? Well, Gareth was slap bang in the intelligence agencies. He was monitoring SWIFT payments, probably knew where all the payments were going and who to. He knew how much dirty money or dark money was coming into the country. Probably had a very good idea of how it was being laundered and who it was going out to and who was being paid off in the UK to either turn a blind eye to it or become part of the laundering process. Goes without saying that he would know this. It would also goes without saying that his superiors in the intelligence services knew all this as well. Coupled with that, you've got the claim that he knew about a Russian mole in GCHQ, one of our most sensitive monitoring services in the UK. So to have a Russian double agent or a mole working within GCHQ is very dangerous, obviously. As I mentioned, the Liz Truss thing coming to light, that could have been somebody within GCHQ, more than likely. He was going to go back to GCHQ. He had all this information. He probably passed it on. At some point, maybe the Russians did say, right, we need to do something about this. Let's see if we can turn him. And apparently, the rumour is that he was met by two Russian associates who tried to turn him into a double agent, and of course he said no, which meant that the only thing they could do now was to get rid of him. Now, it was reported in the press at the time, and still is in some of the older reports, that the flat in Pimlico was an intelligence safe house. It's 50-50 on this. If it was, the intelligence services are denying it. They're saying it was a government-owned property, nothing to do with the intelligence services, never used by them as a safe house. It was just rented by Gareth while he was working down in London. So we come to the article that was published beginning of last month. Now, there's an ex-KGB Russian in this country who defected, who's been saying for a couple of years that it was a Russian hit. The reason why was because they couldn't turn him to be a double agent, and they drugged him in the flat, injected him with a undetectable poison in his ear, locked him in the bag, turned the heating up, wiped down the entire flat to cleanse it, and then left. So they knew that the target was already dead when he was in the bag. It was just a case of clearing up after it. Funnily enough, on his table in his flat there were a couple of phones with different SIM cards. In itself not unusual for an intelligence officer to have things like that lying around. It just isn't. So who is the MP? Norman Baker, Liberal Democrat minister when it was David Cameron's coalition government. He did a podcast with this Russian defector, Boris Kapitchikov, a former KGB major. And you would have thought that a former KGB major would pretty much know how things go, because I don't think when it comes to assassination techniques in Russia that they've updated their procedures much since 2010. So this Boris probably is on the mark. Could we safely assume that it was carried out by the Russians? Well, the Russians over the past few years have had a lot laid at their door. Look at the Russia scandal in America with the Trump presidency. Now you've got Ukraine. I mean, there's no doubt that Vladimir Putin is he's a bad man. He really is a bad man. And also in Russia himself, in Russia itself, Putin is known to whack his political opponents. And as I say, there's been known Russian hits on UK soil within living memory. Alexander Litvinenko, for a start. We all saw the pictures of him slowly dying in a hospital bed, poisoned by a radioactive material called polonium. Horrible, horrible way to die. And it was no doubt Russian, because of the evidence that isn't pretty. It's published, it's out there, you can look it up if you want to, but it's not really at the forefront, especially when it came to other iffy Russian activities in this country. So my verdict is that is diametrically opposed to what the Metropolitan Police concluded, and also it's impossible for him to have locked himself into that bag. It can't be done. Once you've zipped the bag shut, how do you put a padlock on it? People have tried and failed. He was killed because of what he knew. He was murdered because of what he knew. As I say, the Russians tried to turn him and they couldn't. So they had to get rid of him. And this is just, as I say, another potential Russian hit on UK soil. Prior to that, there were 14 other suspicious deaths. And this is not going to be classed as a suspicious death. It's going to be ruled as a death by misadventure or accidental death, when it's quite clearly it wasn't. There were no, on the padlock there wasn't his fingerprints, so how did he lock himself in the bag and then wipe the padlock? Why didn't he leave any trace of his fingerprints on the bath apart from a scuff mark? Doesn't add up, does it? I mean, you don't have to be an expert studying crime scenes to know that what happened to Gareth was a perfect crime, and it was carried out by a professional assassin. And professional assassins you don't hire on the dark web, contrary to popular belief. Assassins of this calibre you find working for governments. They're on the payroll. So is there dark money? Is there Russian money in the Westminster bubble? Yes. Yes, of course there is. Intelligence services know about it. Let's talk about Suella Braverman for a moment. Why is she setting off the intelligence services? Well, because there's probably stuff going on that we don't know about. Remember, the intelligence services are there to protect the country. MI5 are the domestic protectors. MI6 is your foreign intelligence. So either of the intelligence agencies could be expressing deep concerns over Suella Braverman. We will never know, because they consider it'll be a national security issue and be buried. Just like the death of Gareth Williams, at some point may be reclassified as national security and buried. Just lucky that we're able to talk about it now, before it is reclassified. There's lots of links to Russian money and Brexit. Is that possible? Sure. We're pretty sure that the UK has been laundering Russian money. And I would suggest that the murder of Gareth Williams, considering the job that he was doing for the intelligence services, tends to suggest that it happened a lot, and it probably still is happening right now. What would be the point of killing Gareth if you meant to stop the laundering? Well, you don't. He was removed because he'd become too dangerous. He could potentially also identify Russian spies at the centre of GCHQ. I tried to follow up on that story. Was there any noise around this claim? And there's nothing. But then again, it involves the intelligence services. So if there was an internal hunt, then we wouldn't know about it. That person would be removed and deported, assuming they were Russian and they weren't English and turned like they tried to do with Gareth. So it is safe to say that there is Russian money coming into this country still. It is being laundered. And there are people high up who will be part of that process, who will be getting kickbacks. So when people say, well, it has Russian influence, Russian money, pause before you say can't be real, because it can be. And I would suggest that the assassination of Gareth Williams proves that. The fact that it was happening in 2010, the fact that he was murdered because of it, generally suggests that the practice of the dark money laundering is still happening to this very day. So keep an eye out, see what the press bring up, see what they hint at. I'm fairly sure that the politicians are involved in this. How could they not be heart of Westminster? Could it be that Brexit was funded by dark money from Russia? More than likely. I've got no proof that I can hold up in front of you and say, yes, here's the proof. But because of the amount of money coming in, who's to say that some of that money wasn't funneled off for that? It's a lot of money that was being laundered. And Gareth Williams was murdered because of it, because of what he knew. Thank you for listening to the video. I do appreciate each and every one of you for doing so. Any comments, please put them down in the comments section below. I read all the comments and I try to respond to all the comments where applicable. So thank you again, I do appreciate it. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.